Okay, listen to this chilling reality. Ashurnasirpal II, an Assyrian king in the 9th century BC, literally bragged about his conquests with these exact words. I flayed all the chief men who had revolted, and I covered the pillar with their skins. I know, it's incredibly gruesome, but it's absolutely crucial for us to understand the life or death stakes the northern kingdom of Israel was facing at the time. This was the existential terror building up just across their borders.
The fall of the Northern Kingdom, hubris, prophets, and empire collapse. Today, we're diving into this explainer to see exactly how internal corruption, divine warnings, and a looming superpower all collided to destroy an entire empire in 722 BC. We usually think of nations falling just because a bigger army shows up, right? But as you'll see, the true collapse of the Northern Kingdom was this profound, messy mix of moral decay, ignored prophecies, and just astounding political hubris. Tracing the borders of the Assyrian Empire under Shalmaneser III reveals its tentacles slowly, almost methodically extending. At this specific point in time, Samaria, which was the heart of the Northern Kingdom, is still just outside their direct control. But the shadow of this superpower, a superpower known for the unspeakable cruelties we just talked about, was creeping closer and closer to the ancient Middle East. Part 1. The hubris of Ahab. Because, while that external doom loomed, Israel was actually busy rotting right from the inside out. That internal rot was spearheaded by the incredibly corrupt leadership of King Ahab and his infamous wife, Jezebel, who basically made it their official policy to import Baal worship as the state religion. It's human conniving at its absolute worst. Ahab wants a vineyard owned by a guy named Naboth, but Naboth refuses to sell his ancestral land. So, Jezebel steps in. She orchestrates a religious fast, hires 2 false witnesses to accuse Naboth of cursing God, and then has him executed using the very religious laws she despises. All of this just to satisfy her husband's greed. It is insidiously evil. Because of this vileness, the prophet Elijah decrees a pretty shameful death for both Ahab and Jezebel. But it's a bit later, during a military alliance with the southern king Jehoshaphat against Syria at Ramoth-Gilead, that the ultimate test comes. The prophet Micaiah warns Ahab point blank that if he goes into this battle, Israel will be scattered like sheep without a shepherd, meaning the king is going down. Which brings us to a massive question. Can a human king actually outsmart a divine prophecy? Well, Ahab sure thought he could. He cooks up what he thinks is a foolproof plan. He disguises himself as a regular soldier to hide, and get this, he actually convinces his ally, Jehoshaphat, to wear the royal robes instead. He literally makes his ally the prime target for the Syrian army. It just shows Ahab's absolute hubris. He takes these steps thinking he can trick the Lord and dodge his prophesied death. But in the middle of the chaos, a completely random shot from an enemy archer strikes Ahab, and he dies in a pool of blood. You simply cannot outwit the divine. Part 2. Elisha's divine resistance. Right in the middle of all this darkness, political scheming, and idol worship, a bright light emerges in the form of a divine counter-narrative. Comparing these 2 prophets is fascinating because we see how Elisha builds on his predecessor's legacy. We all know Elijah for his dramatic, fiery confrontations, like calling down fire on Mount Carmel. But Elisha asks for and receives a double portion of Elijah's spirit. And if you track the biblical text, Elisha actually performs a greater quantity of miracles, and they're distinctively qualitative. They focus heavily on abundant, life-giving acts. He provides food, he heals a Syrian enemy general named Naaman of leprosy, and he even raises the dead. And there's an absolutely fascinating historical detail here. Elijah famously raised a dead boy back to life in a town called Shunem. Just around the mountain from there, maybe 2.5 to 3 miles away, is a tiny town called Nain. Over 800 years later, Jesus of Nazareth would walk into Nain and perform the exact same miracle, raising a widow's son from the dead. When the people saw Jesus do this, they shouted, "A great prophet has appeared among us." They said that because the geographical echoes of Elijah's ancient miracle were literally right around the corner. Part 3. Jehu's bloody purge. You see, Elisha wasn't just a healer. He was the spark for a massive, violent revolution. Fulfilling those long-standing prophecies against Ahab's wicked dynasty, Elisha secretly sends a prophet to the battlefront to anoint an army general named Jehu as the brand new king of Israel. Jehu doesn't waste a single second. He immediately hops into his chariot and races towards Jezreel to execute his coup. And I just love this detail from the source text. The watchmen on the city towers recognize who's approaching from miles away, not by his flags, but because of his driving. The text literally says, he drives like a madman. It's a great little historical note showing that his furious urgency was known to everyone. Talk about a one-man wrecking ball. Jehu executes his hit list with brutal, rapid efficiency. He assassinates the current king. He arrives at the palace, where Queen Mother Jezebel is thrown from a high window, her blood spattering the walls. He sends letters that terrify the city elders into beheading all 70 of Ahab's sons, and they pile their heads in baskets at the city gates. Finally, he tricks all the prophets of Baal by inviting them to a massive fake religious celebration, locks the doors, and slaughters every single one of them. In one fell swoop, he obliterates Omri's dynasty and wipes out Baal worship. But here's the tragic irony, and really the core takeaway from this history. Despite acting as the instrument of divine justice, Jehu failed to go all the way. He eradicated Baal, for sure, but he intentionally left the golden calves that had been set up generations earlier to keep the people from worshiping in Jerusalem. He failed to remove the core corruption of the nation, and because of this fatal flaw, Israel's ultimate fate remained sealed.
Part 4. The kingdom's final collapse. We've seen the external threats, the wild hubris, and the violent purges. Now, we witness the internal decay completely shatter the nation from the inside out.
Just tracking the timeline of these final fractured years is overwhelming. The turnover of short-lived kings is insane. Zechariah lasts 6 months. Shalom lasts just 1 month. It proves the intense factionalism and the civil strife that was tearing the northern kingdom apart. They were fracturing, with different kings likely ruling over different segmented parts of the kingdom at the exact same time. Now, if you're thinking this era of biblical history is just made-up myth, check out this incredible piece of grounded archaeology. This is the Tel Dan inscription, discovered in 1992 at a city gate in the northern part of the country. It was actually erected by an enemy Syrian king, Hazael, bragging about his military victories over Israel. Carved right into that ancient stone is the Paleo-Hebrew phrase, Beit David, which translates to the House of David. For decades, minimalist historians argued that King David and his dynasty never even existed. But here is a stone from the 9th century BC carved by an enemy nation, historically verifying the royal dynasties we've been tracking today. It is an astonishing confirmation of the historical record. So with Israel utterly fractured by corrupt leaders, violent purges, and a total departure from their foundational laws, they were sitting ducks. The Assyrian Empire, now under the rule of Tiglath-Pileser III and his successors, finally swept in. They made the northern kingdom subservient, demanded heavy tribute, and eventually, in 722 BC, completely wiped them out, taking the population captive. So how quickly does an empire fall when external terrors meet internal moral decay? I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. When we look at the ruins of Samaria, we really have to ask, did the terrifying Assyrian war machine actually destroy the northern kingdom, or did Israel's own arrogant hubris, their moral rot, and their constant internal bloodshed do the job before the invaders even arrived at the gates? Thanks for joining me, and keep questioning the history behind the history.